Ladies and gentlemen of the night, welcome to the shadow behind you. I am your host, the unseen narrator who lingers in the corners of forgotten histories, where the veil between the living and the damned thins to a whisper. Tonight, we descend into the humid heart of antebellum New Orleans, a city built on silt and secrets, where the Mississippi River coils like a serpent, carrying the echoes of chains and chants from distant shores. The year is 1832. A time when the air hung heavy, with the scent of magnolias masking the rot of decay, and yellow fever stalked the streets like a spectral predator, claiming souls in the sweltering summer haze. But it was not just fever that devoured the city, it was the cholera, that insidious plague arriving on immigrant ships, sweeping through the crowded wards and leaving bodies piled like cordwood in the streets. Imagine, if you will, the French Quarter at dusk, the Vieux Carré, with its narrow cobblestone alleys twisting like veins under gaslit lamps that flicker uncertainly, casting elongated shadows that seem to reach out and grasp at passers-by. Balconies of wrought iron, forged by the hands of enslaved artisans, curl like frozen vines over doorways where laughter from quadroon balls spills out, mingling with the distant toll of cathedral bells from St. Louis Cathedral, its spires piercing the twilight sky like accusatory fingers. The air is thick, not just with humidity, but with the mingled aromas of Creole cooking, gumbo simmering in iron pots, the spice of cayenne and thyme clashing with the underlying stench of the river's mud and the open sewers that ran like veins through the city. Horse-drawn carriages clatter over the uneven stones, their wheels splashing through puddles that reflect the flickering torchlight, while street vendors cry out their wares, hot calas, tauchod, rice fritters sold by free women of color, their voices a melodic counterpoint to the distant wail of a steamboat whistle. But beneath this veneer of Creole elegance lies an underbelly of horror, where fortunes are built on human suffering, and the ground itself swallows the screams of the oppressed. New Orleans in 1832 was a cauldron of cultures, French, Spanish, African, American, all boiling together in a stew of ambition and despair. The port bustled with ships from across the Atlantic, unloading cotton, sugar, and human cargo from the auction blocks on Chartres Street, where enslaved people were paraded like livestock, their bodies inspected for strength, their spirits broken under the gaze of bidders. The domestic slave trade had exploded after the 1808 ban on international imports, turning New Orleans into the nation's largest market for human lives. Over 135,000 souls passed through its pens in the antebellum era, families torn asunder, their cries echoing in the humid night. Our tale centers on the Caldwell family, a name once whispered in the salons of the elite with a mix of envy and unease. Elias Caldwell, a prosperous merchant whose ships docked laden with cotton, sugar and souls from the auction blocks, had risen from modest English roots in Charleston to claim a neoclassical mansion at the corner of Royal and Governor Nichols Streets. A grand edifice of stucco and slate, its facade gleaming white under the moon, but hiding chambers of unspeakable darkness. Built in the early 1830s, the house exemplified the Creole townhouse style that emerged after devastating fires in 1788 and 1794 razed much of the quarter. These townhouses rose 2 or 3 stories high, with thick brick walls coated in stucco to withstand the subtropical climate, and galleries, balconies supported by slender iron columns, wrapping around the upper floors, providing shade and a vantage point over the bustling streets. The ironwork, often laced like patterns of vines and fleurs lis, was crafted by enslaved blacksmiths, their artistry a silent testament to stolen labor. Inside, the layout was practical yet opulent. High, ceilinged rooms with cypress floors polished to a sheen, fireplaces flanked by mantels of imported marble, and shuttered windows that could be thrown open to catch the rare breeze off the river. The central courtyard, a hallmark of Creole architecture influenced by Spanish colonial designs, served as a private oasis enclosed by the house on all sides, with a fountain at its center trickling water over mossy stones. Overgrown with jasmine and oleander, it offered respite from the chaos outside, but in the Caldwell home, it masked a deeper malice. the faint, persistent dampness seeping from the flagstones, as if the earth below wept eternally. Elias, with his stern jaw and eyes like polished obsidian, ruled his household with an iron fist gloved in southern gentility. He was a man of the era, profiting from the sugar plantations upriver, where enslaved laborers toiled under the relentless sun, harvesting cane that would be milled into the white gold fueling Europe's sweet tooth. His wife, Amelia, a Creole beauty with porcelain skin and hair the color of raven feathers, moved through the halls like a ghost herself, her silken gowns rustling against the polished cypress floors. Born into a family of French descent, she embodied the refined manners of the old Creole aristocracy, hosting teas where ladies in hoop skirts discussed the latest Paris fashions amid the clink of silver spoons on china. Their children, Theodore, a brooding young man of 20, heir to the family's tainted legacy, tall and lanky with his father's piercing gaze, and Eliza, a delicate girl of 16 whose laughter once echoed like bells but grew faint as the shadows lengthened, completed the portrait of apparent prosperity. Theodore, educated at the finest academies, spent his days learning the intricacies of the trade, accompanying his father to the markets where bids rang out like death knells. Eliza, confined to needlework and piano lessons, dreamed of the masquerade balls that lit up the quarter, unaware of the darkness lurking beneath her home. Yet, rumors swirled through the taverns and marketplaces, whispers of strange cries, emanating from the Caldwell residence at midnight, of servants who vanished without trace, and of a curse invoked in the tongue of ancient rituals. These tales were fueled by the city's voodoo undercurrents, a syncretic religion brought by enslaved Africans in the 1700s, blending West African Vodun with Catholic saints. By the 1830s, Marie Laveau, the emerging voodoo queen, born a free woman of color in 1801, held sway over secret ceremonies at Congo Square, where drums beat rhythms that echoed ancestral spirits. Laveau, a midwife and herbalist, orchestrated rituals on Bayou St. John, including the St. John's Eve celebrations starting in the 1830s, where head-washing ceremonies merged with public feasts invoking low spirits, like Papa Legba, guardian of crossroads. What drew the curious eye to the Caldwells was not merely their wealth, amassed from the bustling slave markets, but the enigma of the well beneath their home. Dug in the colonial era, perhaps by French settlers seeking fresh water amid the brackish bayous, it had long been sealed, its depths a mystery. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, how the ground around it seemed perpetually damp, as if weeping, and how on stormy nights one could hear faint echoes rising from its abyss, pleas, sobs, or something more primal, like the growl of an unearthed beast. In a city haunted by its past, the Lalaurie mansion nearby, where in 1834 horrors of torture would be revealed after a fire, the Caldwell well fit into a tapestry of ghostly legends, from the suicide of Pierre-Antoine Lepardi Jordan in 1814, whose spirit appeared as a glimmer, to the whispers of maroon slaves hiding in the swamps, their independence a defiant ghost in the night. In 1832, New Orleans was a cauldron of chaos. The cholera epidemic ravaged the city that year, arriving in October via ships from Europe, killing over 6,000 in Louisiana alone within months. Bodies piled in the streets, the air thick with the acrid smoke of burning tar barrels meant to purify the miasma. Yellow fever, that insidious Bronze John, lurked in the wings, its mosquito vectors thriving in the stagnant water, claiming thousands annually, over 41,000 between 1817 and 1905, turning the city into a necropolis where death was as familiar as the tolling bells. Amid this plague, the Caldwell's house became a beacon of isolation, its gates barred, its windows darkened. But isolation breeds madness, and madness unearths secrets long buried. Picture yourself standing before that mansion now, dear listener. The humid breeze carries the scent of the river, mud, decay, and the faint spice of gumbo simmering in distant kitchens. You approach the iron gate, its spikes sharp as fangs, and peer into the courtyard. The fountain babbles innocently, but your gaze is drawn to the flagstones at its center, where a rusted grate conceals the well. What lies below? Bodies, treasures, or something that defies the grave, a force awakened by the blood spilled in the name of empire. Feel the chill despite the heat, the prickle on your skin as if unseen eyes watch from the shadows. This is no mere ghost story, it is a descent into the abyss of human depravity, where the sins of the fathers echo eternally. As we unravel the threads of the Caldwell family's horror, prepare to feel the chill of the unknown creep up your spine. For in New Orleans, the past does not rest. It rises, dripping and vengeful, from the depths. Stay with me, if you dare, as we plunge into the heart of the tale. The shadows are lengthening, and they hunger for your attention. A pause for atmospheric sound, distant thunder, a low whisper fading into silence. But first, let us step back into the mists of time, to the arrival of the Caldwells and the first cracks in their facade of fortune. It was the spring of 1832 when Elias Caldwell first laid eyes on the mansion that would become his family's tomb. The city was alive with the clamor of commerce, steamboats chugging along the levee, their paddles churning the brown waters into froth, while merchants haggled over bales of cotton stained with the sweat of enslaved labor. Elias, a man of 45 with a fortune forged in the transatlantic trade, had come from Charleston seeking greater spoils in this glittering port. New Orleans, with its blend of French sophistication and American ambition, promised riches beyond measure. The population swelled with immigrants, Irish fleeing famine, Germans seeking land, crowding into boarding houses where disease festered in the close quarters. He purchased the house from a bankrupt Creole planter, a sprawling three-story affair with galleries wrapping around like embracing arms, their cast iron railings depicting vines and fleurs de lis, symbols of a heritage Elias coveted but could never fully claim. The architecture was quintessential Creole townhouse, evolved from the earlier cottages of the 1790s-1850s, which featured gable or hip roofs and central chimneys serving multiple rooms. This mansion, however, boasted more grandeur. Thick walls of soft local brick, stuccoed smooth and painted in pastel hues to reflect the heat, with high ceilings often 12 to 14 feet to allow hot air to rise. The courtyard was a verdant oasis, shaded by live oaks dripping with Spanish moss that swayed like spectral veils, and banana plants whose broad leaves rustled in the breeze. At its heart lay the well, ancient, its stone rim worn smooth by centuries of use, now capped with a heavy iron lid bolted shut. The cellar mentioned it, offhandedly, an old relic from the Spanish days, best left alone, the water's gone foul. Elias, pragmatic and dismissive of superstition, saw only potential in the property, ignoring tales of its colonial past when it served as part of a convent where heretics and plague victims were disposed of discreetly. Amelia, his wife of 20 years, arrived soon after with the children, her trunks filled with silks from Paris and porcelain from England. The journey up the Mississippi had been arduous, the riverboat crowded with passengers, coughing in the damp air, a harbinger of the epidemics to come. Theodore, tall and lanky like his father, surveyed the house with a predatory gleam, eager to inherit the empire. He imagined himself at the helm of the family's shipping business, navigating the treacherous currents of trade where profits soared on the backs of enslaved labor. Eliza, with her wide eyes and curls the color of honey, clung to her mother's skirts, whispering about the funny smell emanating from the courtyard, a faint, earthy odor like wet soil after rain, mixed with something sharper, metallic, perhaps the residue of old blood or the brackish water below. The household staff arrived next. A dozen enslaved individuals purchased from the markets on Chartres Street, where auctions echoed with the crack of whips and the sobs of families torn asunder. New Orleans was the epicenter of the domestic slave trade, with pens holding thousands annually, buyers inspecting teeth and muscles as if appraising horses. Among the Caldwell's new acquisitions was Maman Celeste, an elderly woman from the Congo coast, her skin etched with ritual scars from initiations long ago, her eyes holding the wisdom of forbidden knowledge. She was assigned to the kitchens, where she prepared meals of red beans and rice, jambalaya infused with sausage and shrimp from the Gulf. But her true role emerged in whispers among the others. She was a practitioner of the old ways, what the whites called voodoo. This faith, rooted in Dahomean traditions, had taken hold in New Orleans since the 1700s, with enslaved Africans invoking spirits through dances at Congo Square on Sundays, the only day of respite. By the 1830s, under Marie Laveau's influence, it blended Catholic elements, saints as proxies for Lo, with herbal remedies and charms. At first, life in the Caldwell mansion unfolded with deceptive normalcy. Elias hosted lavish dinners in the dining room, its walls papered in imported damask, toasting to the prosperity of Louisiana with glasses of claret. Guests, merchants and planters in fine linen suits, discussed the booming sugar industry, where plantations along the river produced fortunes, but at the cost of human lives, enslaved workers dying from exhaustion, malaria, or the overseer's lash. Amelia tended her garden in the courtyard, planting night, blooming jasmine that perfumed the air, masking subtler scents, while she arranged flowers in crystal vases, her hands trembling slightly from the heat. Theodore roamed the streets, indulging in the city's vices, gambling halls on Bourbon Street, where cards slapped against tables amid clouds of cigar smoke, and quadroon balls at the Orleans Ballroom, where free women of color, dressed in elegant gowns, danced under the gaze of wealthy suitors seeking place-age arrangements. Eliza, confined to the upper floors, played with dolls in her room, its walls papered in faded floral patterns that seemed to shift in the candlelight. She would gaze out the window at the passing parades, funeral processions with brass bands playing dirges that morphed into upbeat tunes, a Creole tradition blending sorrow and celebration. But as summer approached, the city sickened. Cholera struck like a thief in the night, its victims writhing in agony, expelling life in torrents of fluid. The epidemic, part of the global pandemic originating in India, arrived in New Orleans in October 1832, killing over 4,000 in the city alone by year's end, with bodies carted to mass graves in the swamps outside town. Streets filled with the wail of mourners, and quarantine flags fluttered from windows like surrender. Voter turnout plummeted in the presidential election that year, from 1,500 in 1828 to 919 as fear gripped the populace. The Caldwells barricaded themselves inside, their house a fortress against the plague. With windows shuttered and doors bolted, servants burned camphor and vinegar to ward off the miasma, the foul air believed to carry the disease. Yet, illness found its way in. One by one the enslaved fell ill, not with cholera, but something stranger, fevers that burned without sweat, nightmares that left them screaming of voices from below. Maman Celeste was the first to speak of it openly. In the sweltering kitchen, as she stirred pots of gumbo thick with ochre and secrets, her hands calloused from years of labor, she warned the others, "Dat well. It hungry. It been fed blood before, in the old days. Spanish priests sealed it 'cause spirits rise up, demand day toll." She spoke of Loa like Baron Samedi, Lord of the Dead, who guarded cemeteries and crossroads, and how wells, in African lore, were portals to the ancestors. The younger slaves dismissed her as superstitious, but Elias overheard and flew into a rage, ordering her whipped in the courtyard. The overseer, a burly man from upriver, cracked the lash across her back, her blood spattering the flagstones, seeping into the cracks toward the well's grate. That night, as thunder rumbled over the gulf, the first whispers began. Eliza heard them first. Lying in her bed, the canopy draping like a shroud, she awoke to a soft murmur rising from the floorboards, a child's voice, plaintive and distant, calling, "Mama, help." Terrified, she tiptoed downstairs, the house creaking under her bare feet like bones shifting in a grave. The air grew colder near the courtyard, and despite the humidity, and she pressed her ear to the stones. The sound grew clearer, not one voice, but many, layered like echoes in a cavern, speaking in a mélange of French, English, Creole, and African tongues. Pleas for mercy, curses against masters. She confided in Theodore, who laughed it off as the wind through the oaks, or perhaps the delirium of fever in the city. But soon, he too experienced the unnatural. Returning late from a night of debauchery, reeking of absinthe from the old absinthe house and perfume from a quadroon mistress, he stumbled into the courtyard. The moon cast silvery light on the fountain, but his eyes widened at a faint glow emanating from the well's lid, pulsing like a heartbeat. Approaching, he felt a chill despite the humid air, his skin prickling as if brushed by invisible fingers. Then, his name whispered, "Theodore, join us." He fled to his room, barricading the door, but sleep brought dreams of drowning in dark waters, hands pulling him down. Amelia, ever the rational Creole matron, attributed the disturbances to the epidemic's miasma, ordering more fumigations. Servants sprinkled lime in the corners, but the whispers persisted, growing louder with each passing night. Elias, in his study surrounded by ledgers tallying human cargo, profits from sales of 50 slaves here, 100 there, pored over old documents acquired with the house. Yellowed parchments from the Spanish era spoke of the site's history. Built on land once a convent, the well had served as a dumping ground for undesirables. Heretics burned at the stake, plague victims from earlier outbreaks, and rebellious slaves tossed alive into its depths to silence their cries. One account mentioned a 1796 uprising, where enslaved plotters were executed and thrown down, their bodies weighting the water with vengeance. As the whispers intensified, the family's facade cracked. Servants began vanishing, Maman Celeste among them, last seen muttering incantations over a doll fashioned from corn husks and hair, a voodoo charm for protection. Elias, paranoid, accused them of desertion or theft, hiring guards to patrol the grounds, but deep down, he suspected the well. Rumors in the city mirrored his fears. Tales of haunted spots like the Ursuline convent, where nuns reportedly sealed vampires in the attic, or the ghosts of executed pirates along the river. One stormy evening, as lightning cracked the sky like divine judgment, illuminating the quarter in stark flashes, Elias gathered tools, a crowbar, ropes, lanterns, to unseal the well, determined to confront the source. The family watched, hearts pounding, as he pried at the lid, the metal groaning like a soul in torment. What he found would shatter the Caldwells forever. But that, dear listener, is for the depths of our tale. The night deepens, and the whispers grow nearer. With the iron lid pried open, the well exhaled a breath of fetid air, dank, laced with the rot of centuries, carrying hints of sulfur and decay that made Elias gag and the family recoil. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a man, its walls slick with moss and slime that clung like decayed flesh, descending into blackness that seemed to swallow the lantern's light whole. Theodore held the rope, his hands trembling as sweat beaded on his brow, lowering his father into the abyss. Amelia watched from the gallery above, her face pale as moonlight filtering through the oaks, her fingers twisting a rosary in prayer to the Virgin Mary, a Catholic talisman against the unknown. Eliza clung to her, eyes wide with terror, the child's intuition sensing the evil stirring below. Elias descended slowly, the rope creaking under his weight like the timbers of a sinking ship, the air growing colder, thicker, heavier with the scent of stagnant water and something metallic, blood perhaps, or rust from old chains. At 20 feet, his boots touched water, brackish still, reflecting his distorted face like a mocking mirror in the lantern's glow. He probed with a pole, feeling soft masses yielding to the touch, bones tangled with rags and rusted irons, remnants of the past. Then a hand grasped his ankle, cold, skeletal, impossibly strong, pulling him down with a force that defied death. He screamed, thrashing in the water, as visions flooded his mind. Flashes of tormented faces, slaves chained and thrown alive during the 1790s rebellions, their eyes pleading as water closed over them. Spanish inquisitors dumping heretics, cholera victims from earlier outbreaks, their bodies convulsing even in death. Theodore hauled him up with all his strength, Elias babbling incoherently about the damned rising. His clothes soaked and reeking, his eyes wild with horror. That night the whispers evolved into screams, agonized howls echoing through the house, rattling the shuttered windows and extinguishing candles with gusts of icy wind. The remaining slaves fled in terror, scaling the courtyard walls under cover of darkness, blending into the maroon communities in the swamps where escaped slaves lived in hidden freedom, trading wood and goods in the city markets. The Caldwells were left alone, the mansion a prison of their own making, as the cholera outside claimed more lives, over 1,000 in Quebec earlier that year, spreading south like a curse. Amelia, driven to desperation, sought help from the shadows of the city. Venturing into the back alleys under cover of night, her cloak drawn tight against the chill rain, she navigated the muddy streets where gas lamps sputtered, casting grotesque shadows. She found a mambo, a voodoo priestess rumored to be kin to Marie Laveau, who by 1830 had risen as the voodoo queen, leading rituals where participants danced into trances, possessed by Lo, the woman cloaked in tattered shawls adorned with beads, bones, and feathers, her neck strung with amulets. Listened to Amelia's tale in a dimly lit shack filled with the scent of herbs, sage, verbena, and High John the Conqueror root. "D-Well is a crossroads," she intoned, her voice like gravel grinding underfoot, her eyes gleaming with ancient knowledge. "Low dwell dear, spirits of the dead, hungry for justice. Your husband, he trade in souls. Day claim day do." She provided a gris-gris bag, a pouch of herbs, graveyard dirt, a vial of chicken blood, and a cross to seal the well, muttering incantations in Creole, "Papa Legba ovri bea po mowen." But as Amelia returned, slipping through the darkened quarter where patrols enforced curfews against the plague, the house had changed. Doors slammed without wind, mirrors cracked spontaneously to reveal fleeting apparitions, emaciated figures in rags, their skin jaundiced from yellow fever, eyes glowing with unearthly fire. The air grew heavy with the buzz of mosquitoes, carriers of the fever that had shaped New Orleans, killing tens of thousands in epidemics like 1853's, when over 9,000 perished. Elizabeth, innocent and sensitive, became the focus of the hauntings. In her room, toys moved of their own accord, dolls marching across the floor, their glass eyes following her, whispering secrets of the family's sins, how Elias had disposed of troublesome slaves by night, binding them with ropes from his ships and dropping them into the well to silence accusations of abuse or rebellion. Theodore, unraveling under the strain, confessed to his own atrocities in a feverish delirium dalliances with enslaved women in the quarters, children born in secret and discarded like refuse, sold downriver to distant plantations. The well, it seemed, was a repository not just of bodies, but of guilt, a psychic sinkhole where the family's darkness pooled, amplified by the city's history of violence. As cholera raged outside, bodies burned in pyres along the levee to prevent spread, the horrors within escalated. Elias, feverish himself, barricaded in his study, watched as walls bled, rivulets of crimson seeping from cracks in the stucco, pooling on the floor in shapes of accusing fingers pointing at his ledgers. One fateful night, during a tempest that flooded the streets, turning the quarter into a labyrinth of rushing water, Eliza vanished. Her screams pierced the storm, drawing the family to the courtyard where rain lashed the flagstones and the well's lid lay askew, bubbles rising from its depths like boiling wrath. Theodore, driven by guilt and desperation, descended with lantern in hand, the rope slick in the downpour. At the bottom, he found her, floating face up, eyes open in eternal terror, her nightgown tangled with skeletal remains that clutched at her like lovers in death. As he reached for her, the bones animated, fleshless fingers grasping his arms, pulling him under. He fought, gasping for air, but the visions overwhelmed him, scenes of the slave trade. Auctions where mothers were separated from children, the hold of ships crammed with bodies during the Middle Passage echoes. Elias and Amelia watched in horror from above, lightning illuminating the scene as their son disappeared into the murk, his cries echoing until silenced by a final gurgle, the water rippling with his struggle. In the aftermath, the Caldwell's world collapsed. Amelia, mad with grief, wandered the halls muttering prayers to saints and lower alike, her once elegant gowns tattered, her mind fractured like the mirrors. Elias, broken and haunted, attempted to fill the well with earth hauled from the garden, but each dawn revealed it empty, yawning wider, as if the earth rejected the seal. Rumors spread through the city of unnatural lights in the mansion's windows, figures seen dragging chains across the courtyard, echoing the ghosts of the Lalaurie house nearby, where in 1834 a fire would expose chambers of torture. When a fire broke out in the Caldwell mansion in 1834, much like the Lalaurie blaze, perhaps sparked by a servant's revenge or the spirits themselves, rescuers found horrors hidden rooms with instruments of torture, whips and irons stained with blood, and the well brimming with remains, bones of dozens, mingled with artifacts from African rituals. Elias and Amelia perished in the flames, their screams joining the chorus from below. But the spirits lingered, their vengeance incomplete, whispering to those who dared approach the ruins. The house was rebuilt, but the well remained, a silent sentinel, waiting for the next cycle of sin. The tale ends, but the echoes persist, in the wind, in the water, in the shadows behind you. To truly grasp the chilling essence of the Caldwell horror, we must delve into the real tapestry of 1832 New Orleans, a city forged in fire, flood, and human folly, where history and legend intertwine like the roots of ancient cypress trees in the Bayous. Founded in 1718 by Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne de Bienville under French rule, New Orleans was ceded to Spain in 1763, returned to France in 1800, and sold to the United States in 1803 as part of the Louisiana Purchase. By the 1830s, it had become America's third largest city, a bustling port at the mouth of the Mississippi, trading in cotton, sugar, and slaves, its population a mosaic of French Creoles, Spanish descendants, free people of color, enslaved Africans, and American immigrants. The year 1832 was scarred by dual plagues, cholera and yellow fever, which turned the city into a charnel house. Cholera, part of the second global pandemic, 1829-1851, arrived in New Orleans in October 1832 via ships from Europe, spreading rapidly through contaminated water and poor sanitation. Over 6,000 died in Louisiana that year, with New Orleans hardest hit. Thousands perished in weeks, bodies stacked in streets or dumped in the river, the air reeking of death. Tar barrels burned day and night. Their smoke meant to cleanse the miasma, while quarantines isolated neighborhoods. Voter turnout dropped dramatically in the 1832 election, reflecting the panic. Yellow fever, endemic since the 1790s, compounded the terror. Transmitted by Aedes aegypti mosquitoes breeding in stagnant water, it caused jaundice, bleeding, and convulsions. Between 1817 and 1905, over 41,000 died in New Orleans from yellow fever, with major outbreaks in 1833 and 1853 killing 9,000. These epidemics shaped social norms. Orphans filled institutions, cemeteries like St. Louis No. 1 overflowed with above-ground tombs to combat flooding graves, and fueled superstitions as survivors attributed escapes to charms or prayers. Slavery was the city's dark engine, its economy built on human bondage. After the 1808 federal ban on the international slave trade, New Orleans became the hub of the domestic trade, with over 135,000 people bought and sold in its markets during the antebellum period. Auction houses on charters and esplanade streets displayed enslaved individuals, men, women, children, from the Upper South, inspected for labor value. Urban slavery differed from rural plantations in New Orleans. Enslaved people lived in close proximity to owners, performing domestic tasks, crafts, or hiring out their labor, earning small sums in a system called self-hire. But resistance simmered. Maroons escaped to swamps, forming communities that traded clandestinely, while plots like the 1811 German Coast Uprising, suppressed with brutal executions, haunted white society. The Caldwell family's wealth mirrored this. Merchants like Elias profited from shipping enslaved labor to sugar plantations, where mortality rates were high from overwork and disease. Voodoo added an eerie layer, a cultural resistance born from oppression. Arriving with West African slaves in the 1700s, Vodun blended with Catholicism. Loa like Izili Danta equated to the Virgin Mary, creating Louisiana voodoo. By the 1830s, Marie Laveau, a free Creole woman born in 1801, emerged as its queen. A midwife, herbalist, and community leader, she orchestrated ceremonies at Congo Square, now Louis Armstrong Park, where enslaved people gathered on Sundays for dances and rituals, drums invoking spirits. In 1830, Laveau began St. John's Eve celebrations on Bayou St. John, combining head-washing rituals with feasts, drawing crowds for midsummer solstice observances. Voodoo served as empowerment, Grisbags and Vives symbols offered protection against masters, while curses targeted oppressors. Wells in African cosmology were sacred portals to the underworld, sites for offerings, mirroring the Caldwell well as a crossroads, where spirits demanded tolls. Creole culture enriched this backdrop. Descendants of French and Spanish settlers intermarried with free people of color, creating a vibrant society. By 1830, over 11,000 free people of color lived in New Orleans, owning property, businesses, and even slaves, practicing place-age, concubinage arrangements with white men. But Americanization eroded their rights, laws restricted gatherings, fueling resentment. Architecture reflected this fusion. Creole cottages from the 1790s, 1850s were simple, one-story homes with gable roofs, central chimneys and a vent overhangs for shade. Townhouses like the Caldwell's post-1800 featured galleries, courtyards for ventilation, and ironwork by enslaved artisans. Fires in 1788 and 1794 led to Spanish-style brick construction, influencing the quarter's look. Haunted legends proliferated, blending fact and folklore. The French Quarter teemed with ghost stories. The Lalaurie Mansion, 1832, built, where Delphine Lalaurie tortured slaves, exposed in 1834's fire. Ghosts of chain victims reportedly scream there still. Other tales include the Octoroon Mistress on Royal Street, a spectral lover awaiting her paramour, or the Devil's Mansion on Governor Nichols, where card games with Satan ended in damnation. These echoed real traumas, epidemics, slavery's brutality, pirate executions under Jean Lafitte. Pierre Dagobert, an 18th-century priest, legendarily gave burial to executed rebels, his ghost wandering. The Caldwell tale fits this pattern. A well as a grave for the oppressed, spirits rising for justice, authenticating the eerie through historical pain. Blending fact and myth. The narrative draws from New Orleans soil, saturated with blood and tears. Cholera and yellow fever bred paranoia, slavery's horrors manifested as supernatural retribution, voodoo as a tool for the powerless. The cities above ground cemeteries, cities of the dead, symbolize this, tombs like ovens in the heat, where the deceased seem restless. In 1832, amid death and despair, such stories provided explanation, warning against hubris. The Caldwells represent the elite's downfall. Their house a microcosm of a city built on unstable ground, where the past bubbles up like swamp gas, unsettling and eternal. Beneath the chilling surface of the Caldwell narrative lies a profound exploration of universal fears. The buried past resurfacing, the inescapable weight of inherited sin, and the fragile illusion of control over the chaotic unknown. The well serves as a potent symbol, a Freudian abyss representing the subconscious, where repressed traumas fester and erupt, consuming the repressors. Psychologically, it embodies the unbound, the primal urges of greed, violence, and denial that the Caldwells embody, manifesting as hallucinations, poltergeists, or collective madness amplified by the isolation of epidemics. In Jungian terms, it's the shadow archetype, the dark side of humanity, the collective unconscious of a society built on exploitation, rising to confront the ego's facade. Thematically, the story connects to America's cultural trauma, slavery as the nation's original sin, where the exploited return as spectral avengers demanding reckoning. In New Orleans, this mirrors the city's legacy, prosperity from cotton and sugar fueled by enslaved labor, but haunted by unrest, uprisings, and the moral rot beneath. The well's victims, slaves discarded like refuse, symbolize the dehumanization of the trade. Their whispers echo the silenced voices of history, a reminder that oppression breeds resistance, even from beyond the grave. Voodoo amplifies this, as a syncretic faith of empowerment. Lower like Baron Samedi, trickster of death, invert power dynamics, cursing the elite with their own guilt. Mamen Celeste's warnings and the Mambo's Gris represent cultural resilience, African traditions surviving transplantation, blending with Catholicism to form a hybrid spirituality that terrifies the oppressors. Human nature's duality shines through in the characters. Elias, the ambitious patriarch, masks cruelty with gentility, his ledgers tallying lives as commodities, a reflection of antebellum capitalism's moral bankruptcy. His descent into the well is a literal and metaphorical plunge into self-confrontation, the visions forcing acknowledgement of his sins. Amelia's denial crumbles under the weight of reality, her rationality giving way to madness, illustrating how societal roles confine women, leaving them vulnerable to the horrors men unleash. Theodore's confessions reveal generational transmission of evil, the heir corrupted by privilege, while Elisa's innocence makes her the perfect vessel for the spirits, highlighting how the young inherit the burdens of the old. The narrative evokes existential dread, the fear that our foundations are rotten, that beneath civility lurks barbarism, as seen in the epidemics that stripped away illusions of safety. Yellow fever and cholera, indiscriminate killers, exposed class divides, the poor died in droves, while the wealthy fled to uptown estates, yet no one escaped entirely. This taps into Thanatos, Freud's death drive, where the well as a womb of rebirth becomes a tomb, symbolizing cycles of destruction and failed renewal. Universally, it resonates with fears of the author. The enslaved as spectral threats, voodoo as exotic menace, rooted in colonial anxieties. Intellectually, the story questions history's silences, how folklore fills gaps in official records, blending facti like the 1832 cholera deaths with myth to process collective trauma. New Orleans, cities of the dead. Cemeteries underscore this. Tombs as archives of the forgotten, where ghosts narrate untold stories. The Caldwells embody hubris, their downfall a cautionary tale against exploiting others, lest the shadows awaken. It connects to broader human nature, the psychological toll of guilt, the cultural trauma of displacement, African slaves' lost heritage, and the ominous interplay of environment and fate, the swampy terrain breeding mosquitoes and miasma, metaphor for moral decay. In an ominous tone, consider how this reflects modern fears, buried secrets in family histories, societal injustices resurfacing in protests or reckonings. The well's hunger is eternal, a symbol of unfinished business, leaving us to ponder what lies in our own depths. The story haunts because it whispers that no seal is permanent, the past demands audience, and ignoring it invites doom. As our immersion into the Caldwell family's abyss draws to a shadowed close, the mansion stands eternal in memory, a crumbling ruin where vines choke the once elegant ironwork, and the well, though sealed by time and forgetfulness, whispers still to those who listen. Elias and Amelia, consumed by flames or madness, vanished into obscurity, their names erased like footprints washed away by the Mississippi's relentless tide. Theodore and Eliza, pulled into the depths, joined the chorus of the damned, their youthful promise snuffed out by the weight of ancestral sins. The house was rebuilt in later years, its architecture echoing the Creole resilience, but the courtyard's flagstones bear invisible stains, and on stormy nights, when thunder rolls like judgment, faint cries rise from below, pleas for justice, echoes of chains, the growl of unquiet spirits. What became of the well's victims? Do they still cry out, their voices carried on the humid wind, seeking restitution in a world that built empires on their bones? New Orleans teaches us a chilling lesson: the past is never truly buried. It lingers in the air thick with jasmine and decay, in the water that floods the streets, in the very stones underfoot that absorb the blood of history. The city's haunted legacy, from the Lalaurie horrors to voodoo rites under the moon, reminds us that some debts transcend death, demanding payment from the living. Dear listener, as you extinguish your light and settle into the quiet, listen closely to the silence. Is that a whisper from the corner, a faint call from below? The shadow behind you, it knows your secrets too, and it waits patiently for the moment when denial cracks and the depths claim their due. Until our next descent into the forgotten, sleep uneasily, for the veil is thin and the damned are restless.